the Spirit Sessions podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us, where I'll help you find your true spiritual home, where every single aspect of you is holy ground, holy ground, holy ground, holy ground.
This is a Spirit Session podcast with Katie Silcox. Venga chicos, empezamos.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi everyone, Katie here. This podcast is intended to inspire you, educate you, and most importantly, support you on your journey towards knowing who you really are, that inner self, that inner teacher. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor and do not offer professional health or medical advice on this podcast. If you are suffering from any kind of psychological or medical issue, please do the right thing and seek help from your qualified health professional. Hey everyone, this week's podcast is brought to you by Beauty Balm from Banyan Botanicals. You know, I love Banyan and we use them all the time. They've been such a super support for the Shakti school, and their Beauty Balm is amazing. If you've got dry, dull skin or you just feel like it's never quite nourished, the Banyan Botanicals Beauty Balm is all about nourishment. Glow starts with how you nourish your skin, and this balm has deep, lasting moisture and care. It's made with nourishing ghee, clarified butter, shatavari, and a subtle rose geranium scent, creating a rich, soothing blend that helps soften the skin, support hydration, and promote that healthy, natural glow at any age. And I love how versatile it is. It's one balm, every dry spot. You can use it on your face, hands, lips, cuticles, elbows, knees, wherever, lady. Wherever your skin needs a little attention, Banyan Beauty Balm does it all. And the good thing is a little goes a long way. It leaves your skin feeling soft, supple, and genuinely cared for. I use this, you all. It really is so good. And I love everything from Banyan. I mean, honestly, they use high quality ingredients. They care about sustainability in the planet and deeply rooted in that ancient wisdom of Ayurveda. So if you're looking for one super simple product to support glowing, hydrated skin, try Banyan Botanicals Beauty Balm. You can find it at banyanbotanicals.com, and I'll link to it also in the show notes. Enjoy. Hey everybody, it's your Ayurveda Gal Friday here, Katie Silcox. First, I want to say, you guys, we have so much good stuff happening in July, totally for free. We have 2 webinars coming up, an amazing webinar on DIY Ayurveda summer body scrubs. Who wants to make beautiful organic body oils? I'm going to teach you how in July. And we're also going to talk about just all the good hot girl summer that we're going to prepare for, and lots of products that make you feel good, and just the Ayurvedic perspective around how to do all of that. So make sure you are on our mailing list, following us on Instagram, and getting those beautiful free resources, and we can hang out together live. So check that out. Today we are talking about something super cool. I think it's something that we all kind of intuit. And, you know, you can see these amazing images in the iconography of India of the Shiva Shakti coming together, this male and female, this masculine, feminine, yin yang, Shiva Shakti, Brahmalanga, you know, call it what you will. There's a duality in our world. And of course, within that duality of polarization, there is an endless spectrum of diversity and nuance, and that's how Mama Nature rolls. And so when we talk about the male versus female body, we're always talking about a spectrum, right? In general, men are bigger. They are going to have more testosterone. They are stronger. In general, that's true. And then within that, you have variation. I saw an incredible offering on Instagram the other day about explaining the male versus the female brain. I think it was Dr. Amen. If you're not familiar with his work, he does great stuff on the brain and neuroscience, super cool stuff. And it really led me into kind of wanting to know what really is the science around the male versus female brain? Is there evidence there? Is there science there? The tradition that we study, Ayurveda, certainly outlines vast differences between the male and female physiognomy and physiology, and even the way our nervous system behaves. And, as somebody that likes to hang out with men, has a relationship with a man, I'm like, what's going on inside of him? And I'm a big fan of, men are from Mars, women are from Venus conversation, especially his latest version of the book, because he really talks about these endocrinology and hormone differences and how that changes our entire spectrum of reality. There's an interesting story on This American Life about a lesbian woman that began taking testosterone. She wanted to transition, and how she started to notice her entire personality changed. She went from being, someone that was, very considerate of others' feelings and really like kept to herself, to like taking a lot of testosterone and suddenly being a little bit more extroverted and maybe even wanting to like whistle at women on a train. And she identifies now as a he. He was saying, I really changed when I began to take this one hormone. So I think learning about the differences between the male and the female brain and body can really help us do a really important thing, and that is understand one another better, understand ourselves better, navigate conflict better, navigate working together better, navigate loving each other more. Whether you, want to be in an intimate or sexual relationship with a man, or you simply want to get along better with the men in your life, I think this can be really, really helpful. And so the modern neuroscience take on it is that men and women do show differences in their brain structure and the connectivity between the left and right hemisphere. Of course, as I mentioned, in their hormones, in their cognition, what they tend to be better at in terms of their interests and jobs that they tend to lean towards. And most importantly, from a tantric perspective, men and women show differences in perception. Not necessarily that we have two completely different brain types, like there's a male brain and a female brain. That's not really it. Our brains are essentially a brain, but that human brains in general are more like a unique mosaic with overlapping patterns. And I think that's that tension in it not exactly being different, but not exactly being the same is why we can really feel like so connected to one another, but also can have a lot of conflict and challenge. So let's go into it a little bit deeper. Today, I want to talk a little bit about our anatomy. I mentioned hormones, perception, memory, and there's a big myth that got popular a while ago, and that is that we have these two totally different brains. So men have male brains and women have female brains, case closed. But the neuroscience, as we always see with neuroscience and physiognomy and anatomy in general, it's all very, very nuanced, right? And one of the most influential researchers in this area is a woman named Daphna Joel. And her team analyzed thousands of brain scans, and they found something pretty cool. And that was that most brains are not purely male or purely female, but they were mixtures of features that might be more traditionally associated with both sexes. In other words, you might have one region in your brain that looks statistically more common in males and another region more common in females. In other words, just like the doshas, we can talk about a male brain and we can talk about a female brain in terms of statistical tendencies, but when you actually look at someone's brain, it's not exactly one thing. Just like you're not only a vata, or you're not only a pitta, or you're not only a kapha. You're all three, and you're this like beautiful mix of all. And it's the same thing with our brain. And it's why people get really upset when you try to put, things into boxes like, oh, that's a thing dudes do, or that's a thing for women. No, not every woman processes life in the exact same way. And not every man does either. Sure, average differences absolutely do exist between men and women. And those averages show up consistently across large populations of human beings all over the world. So yes, we need to be in reality. Men and women are different. And those differences are nuanced. Another thing that I want to talk about is brain connectivity, because this is something I read about, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I even had like a screensaver on my computer that was an image of this because it was so interesting to me. So there was a study that came out from the University of Pennsylvania. They examined brain connectivity in 1,000 people. And what I mean by that is the connection between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. You have a certain, I can't remember the name of it, but you have essentially like tentacles that link the left and the right brains. Now, what they found got a lot of attention because it was pretty cool. Male brains showed more connectivity within each hemisphere. So, in other words, in the left brain, there was more connection, and in the right, there was more connection. Female brains showed more connectivity between the hemispheres. In other words, between the left and the right. And that doesn't mean men only use one side of their brain, right? We all use both. But what they found was that males showed slightly greater, let me say it like this. Males showed that the parts of their brain related to specialization were higher connection, whereas females showed greater integration across all networks. It makes sense. Think of thousands of years of evolution where our ancestors were probably, the men were out like focused on the hunt, and the women had to be back with the kids kind of doing tasks around the campfire and having to have their brain aware of multiple things at once. So one brain style tends towards focused channels and the other tends towards broader crosstalk between the brains. It's awesome, right? It's not better or worse. It's just we have these different tendencies. And they surmised that this might partially explain why, women are often considered better at integrating emotional, social, context, cues, information like simultaneously, whereas men appreciate more of a narrowed attention and get really locked into specific tasks or objectives. So again, we're talking about averages. It's not the destiny of every man and woman. Of course, there are women that can be super focused and drive in on tasks. There are men that are great at integrating emotional and social context. It's not cut and dry. Remember, you are a mixture of all of this. But when we talk about cross-population statistics, that's what we find. Another funny difference between male and female brains. There's a great sort of relationship meme mystery, and that is, the classic thing of a man saying, something happened 3 years ago. And the woman says, it was Tuesday, you were wearing the blue shirt, we were at the restaurant with the yellow napkins, I was upset about X, Y, and Z. And research consistently finds that women outperform men on certain forms of episodic memory and social memory tasks. So they remember the emotional context, they remember the social interactions, they might remember, more of the colors in the room. They definitely remember more of the relational details. On average, they are going to be way more accurate, whereas men tend to perform better on spatial tasks and mental rotation tasks. So, put this there, go there. I think about my own partner. He's really good at like putting cars together and bikes and things. It's like that type of thing. And so a lot of evolutionary biologists and psychologists have offered up explanations around that. But from a relationship perspective, we may feel it like women will remember the emotional history and details in the relationship in much greater detail. And men can be kind of shocked that like this archive exists, right? I know that is, again, relative because I always keep forgetting, specific anniversaries and, but I can remember what I felt and I can remember the storyline, right? But I can't remember the date. Another big misunderstanding in like the brain debate is about emotions. And this is where stereotypes, I think, are not always super helpful at all. There's a not helpful stereotype that like men are more rational and less emotional. Men are more logical, women more emotional, and neuroscience, the research, it's just not there. And I love that, right? Because men are experiencing their emotions just as intensely as we are as women. In fact, I think sometimes even more, but they are not. Well, there are some studies that show that there's just less tolerance for emotion. And that may be a physical thing, but it can also just be the way that social conditioning, our culture allow for it or not. And in brain imaging studies, they find that women show stronger activation in networks associated with emotional awareness and social cognition, but they are not showing that men don't deeply feel. In general, women seem to be better at reading facial expressions and knowing like what the social cue around body language and facial movements. Women are usually better at picking up on emotional nuance. But what they also found was that men frequently externalize their stress more, whereas women internalize it. So we're having the same nervous system response to emotion, but men might be expressing it differently. And I think that's really sweet because we're both suffering, right? We just have different strategies on managing the suffering. And if you read the new updated version of Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars, he talks about the window of tolerance for deeply emotional and even like negatively emotion laden conversations is just different. And that a lot of times men report having a window tolerance of maybe like 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 11 minutes for difficult conversations. And then the tendency for the male nervous system is to want to just, let's just take a break, walk away. You know, the classic, he gets in the car and takes a drive. Whereas women have probably a couple of hours. Women in general are going to want to repair through words and feelings, whereas men need to take space to be able to allow their nervous system to downregulate so then they can come back to repair. And of course, we all know the language of attachment, right? It's going to be a little bit more of that anxious attached or avoidance behaviors. But in general, I don't think it's helpful to put that label on it only because this might just be a feature of our nervous system. Now, it's not to say that some women don't want to walk away and talk about it later and that there aren't men that want to talk it to death, right? But just to kind of be aware of that tendency that we all have that might be different. Hormones definitely change our perception, as we saw in that example I gave in the beginning. And brains are not just like floating in a jar at the top of our head, right? We live inside our own endocrine system, and the hormones truly do alter how we perceive, what we feel motivated to do or not do, what we care about, where we want to put our attention. Hormones definitely alter our threat detection systems. And in Ayurveda, it is often talked about that the woman's hormonal system and in the uterus in general as an organ tends to hold more hypervigilance, more fear, more a sense of wanting to make sure that we're okay all the time, right? And estrogen plays a big role in that. Estrogen influences memory, cognition, emotion, even how we can respond to stress. And so we definitely know as a woman's hormones start to change around perimenopause, it can be really, really challenging, right? And that quote change that we undergo isn't just a hormonal change, it's a entire perceptual change. And so Ayurveda's understood this long before we've had like lab work or MRIs. When we have more testosterone, we are going to actually perceive reality differently. And what does this mean for how we relate to our beloveds, right? Especially the men in our lives. You know, Tantra is really interested in relationships. And I think I've definitely experienced this. So much of when we have conflict with our beloveds, whether it be a man or a woman, but particularly the conflict between the sexes, a lot of our suffering happens because we're in a lot of assumptions, right? This is how I experience reality. This is my perception. And of course, I'm right, right? This is how I experience reality, and you should too. Another thing that I think often happens is the thing that we're upset about with our partners often isn't the thing that we're upset about at all, right? These deepest intimate relationships really open us into some of our most painful content and unprocessed memory. And so I think one of the things that we can start to really begin with in intimate relationships, especially between men and women, is that we are not processing this moment identically. In fact, we aren't processing the moment identically with anyone. You are not me, and I am not you. There is at least a 7 chakra system operating within us that is stored content, emotional memory, energy, the way I, move and kind of work with my energy is going to be totally different than you. And so many of the conflicts that we have aren't about bad intentions. It's about 2 different perceptual worlds crashing into one another, especially if you're like me and I'm kind of a girly girl underneath it all. You're partnered with someone that is not, right? My dude is hardcore dude. And it's interesting, like underneath all of that, so many of like the most like dude masculine guys I've met like are secretly within all that yang, there's the yin, right? They're like secret softies. And for the women out there that are like more in their feminine and perhaps like wanting everybody to get along and like caretaking and very emotionally aware, they're like secretly badasses, underneath the surface, they're pit bulls. And I love that because within all that yin, there's always that little bit of yang. I think if we really take a step back, we can see that in our conflicts, there's usually someone who's tracking emotional meaning and someone who's tracking practical solutions. One is monitoring, am I safe? Am I loved? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And the other is monitoring outcomes. Why are we spending our time on this? Both think that they're seeing the most important part of reality, but what they're really seeing is just a piece. And I think love can be so beautiful, right? When we can just stop and be curious about the other slice of the pie. And there's a really cool method called the Sedona method. And in one of the techniques in that method, you in relationship, you let your partner argue their side until they're complete. You listen with your full attention and curiosity. And then the other person does the same. And then you swap roles and you argue their perspective with as much powerful intensity as possible. You essentially switch roles. You take off your own perceptual apparatus and put on theirs. And that is an amazing evolutionary technique. It expands our consciousness. It allows us to expand our love and compassion and our understanding of one another. And so you can try that out with you don't even have to be with a man. You can do this with your mom, with your friend, with anybody. So are male and female brains really that different? Well, yes and no. The brain is the brain, but modern neuroscience clearly shows there are average differences in our anatomy, in the connection between the hemispheres, in our cognition, in our hormones. But are we completely different species? No, not even close. We have more overlap with one another than differences. Those little individual differences are often larger than the average sex differences themselves. So what that means is there's no such thing as a perfectly male brain or female brain. There are only unique human beings with their unique stories and their unique nervous systems and their unique values and their unique tendencies and longings. And every relationship that we're in is like a universe crashing into another one. Certainly we can learn, and I want to, and I hope you do too, learn about the opposite sex. But that translation is that really we're more alike than we are different. And at the end of the day, I think both of us just really want to be seen and that what is seen is okay. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And I hope you'll think about joining us in our upcoming Level 1 course that's starting January. We are currently in early bird pricing, but that price won't last forever. So check us out in the show notes. We've got the mini course. We have lots of free resources for you this summer, and we will see you there live on Zoom. A big special thanks to Kevin Carlisle of Goodbye Gemini, who wrote this beautiful podcast music, and to DJ Juan Pablo Jimenez in southern Spain for mixing it and making it magic.